Shalutashvili, Georgian scholar, but nowadays she is in Germany. The title of her presentation is Konstantin Marjanishvili's Influence on the Russian Theater Avant-Garde. And dear Elene, please share your presentation. If you have sound, share the sound first and then presentation. Okay.
I don't have any sounds.
Yeah, okay.
I want to ask you if you can see
Firstly,
my
I want you to present yourself and your institution.
I'm Elene Shalutashvili. I originally come from Georgia. I've graduated my bachelor at the Theater and Film Georgia State University, and I see so many familiar faces in this Congress because I see my lecturers, which when I was studying in Georgia. But after graduating from Bachelor of Theater Studies, I've started my Master of Theater Studies at the University of Leipzig, and I did my research about Brecht on the Soviet stage, and I wrote my master's thesis actually about this topic of meaning of Brecht, direct interpretations of Brecht at the Soviet and especially in the Georgian Soviet stage. And today, I'm a master's candidate of theater studies at the University of Leipzig. I'm waiting for my final grades, and today I'm going to present to you one of the very important topics for me and one of the most influential person in the history of Georgian theater, and not only of Georgian theater, Konstantin Marjanishvili. And I want to focus on his influence, not only on Georgian theater, but also on Russian theater avant-garde, which is now very popular in nowadays German theater studies, actually. And there are many scholars who are researching, especially this era of Russian Silver Age, Russian theater Silver Age, and Russian theater avant-garde. So, Konstantin Marjanishvili's influence on the Russian theater avant-garde. Often when we speak about occupation, the first thing that comes to mind is a territorial occupation. Unfortunately, however, occupation does not only size territories, but information as well, and it rewrites history to suit its own interests. Since in most cases the English-speaking audience forms its understanding of the history and biographies of Georgian theater and theater practitioners through the information translated from Russian or taken from Russian primary sources, we face the following problem. In most cases, Georgian names are Russified, and the work and influence of Georgians are buried in the shadow of imperialism. Consequently, speaking about the history of Georgian theater on the international stage serves not only to tell history, but also aims for a process of derussification. One of the most significant figures during the era of the 20th century revolutionary theater was Kota Marjanishvili, who is mainly, sadly, known as Marjanov. Revolutionary theater, as the theater scholar Robert Leach notes, is an era of absurdly idealistic theater during the period of the October Revolution, when theatrical movements emerged that were previously difficult even to imagine. It was not only a political but also a creative upheaval, which unfortunately was later deprived of all means of development by the doctrine of socialist realism. Vsevolod Meyerhold, for example, is often cited as one of the main theatrical symbols of the October Revolution with his biomechanics. Furthermore, theater practitioners like Georgian director and pedagogue Mikhail Tumanishvili note that there are two theatrical poles, the Stanislavski system and Meyerhold's biomechanics. It is worth noting that the theatrical processes that emerged during the period of the October Revolution were not satisfied solely with the Stanislavski system and Meyerhold's biomechanics. This is precisely what is pointed out by Svetlana Lukanicheva's work on Alexander Tyrov between Moscow Chamber Theater between Russia and the West, born from the spirit of movement. The book was published in September 2025, and it is safe to say that it is a successful attempt to equate Alexander Tyrov's work with Konstantin Stanislavski's and Vsevolod Meyerhold's work. The work relies on Russian primary sources, and this is where we encounter a key issue. Despite mentioning Marjanishvili, the work shows a tendency to treat Alexander Tyrov independently from Marjanishvili, while Marjanishvili is once again recorded as Marjanov. The Moscow Chamber Theater emerged on the ideological ruins of Moscow Free Theater, following its destruction. The Moscow Free Theater was founded by Konstantin Marjanishvili, an attempt to reconstruct information about the Free Theater was made by the researcher Vladimir Yakovlevich Levinovsky, who critically evaluates the existing information on the Free Theater and substantiates that it had a serious influence. Nevertheless, he cites incorrect perceptions created by other authors regarding the importance of the free theater, including Sokrat Setovich Kara, who noted that actors' accounts of Marjanishvili's free theater were exaggerated. The author opposes this and justifies that free theater was one of the most significant theaters of the Russian Silver Age and Russian theater avant-garde. It is noteworthy that before Marjanishvili founded the Free Theater, he traveled a long path, starting his amateur career in Clarely in Georgia, which he later continued in Tbilisi and subsequently in Moscow and other foreign cities. Marjanishvili possessed phenomenal theatrical experience. Notably, Marjanishvili worked at the Moscow Art Theater with Konstantin Stanislavski when Edward Gordon Craig was working on Hamlet at the Moscow Art Theater. Marjanishvili was responsible for the stage lighting. As seen in the correspondence between Stanislavski and Gordon Craig, the only component of the production that was flawlessly assembled during the staging phase was the lighting. Everything else, including the costumes, was not only unsuitable for the play, but had lost all of the possible forms. Eventually, Marjanishvili completed Gordon Craig's Hamlet, and it was his exceptional approach to the work that led to the following. On Stanislavski's recommendation, Marjanishvili traveled to Berlin to study stage lighting under Max Reinhardt. From here begins Marjanishvili's entire odyssey of professional activity. Alexander Tyrol later wrote about him, and among all these reports, there appeared the strange, almost fantastic figure of Marjanov, a man who must undoubtedly have been omnipresent, for judging by the newspaper at one and the same time, he was working in Moscow on the staging of La Belle Elene, conducting negotiations with Varlamov in St. Petersburg, conferring with Gordon Craig in Florence, watching the Yellow Jacket in China, assembling an orchestra in Prague, making arrangements in London for a foreign guest performance and buying balls in Ukraine for the fair at Sorochintsy. The experience of completely different theatrical practices could never have allowed Marjanishvili to create a monotonous theater. It was written about Marjanishvili that he spoiled the actors, that he poisoned the actors of the Moscow Art Theater because in 1911, production of Knut Hamsun's In the Grip of Life, he forced the actors to dance a foxtrot instead of to develop a conflict and instead of developing inner conflict of the actors. He staged a scene with dance where passion and confrontation merged. As it was written, the ruthless Marjanishvili took Stanislavski's best students, including Alice Könen. Given Marjanishvili's diverse experience, it is not surprising that the Moscow Free Theatre he founded and subsequently the Moscow Chamber Theatre was a theatre that has begun a new era in Russian theatre avant-garde. Alexander Tyrol wrote that when he arrived in Moscow in 1913, he was explicitly determined not to get involved with theatre. However, unfortunately for him, the daily newspapers were writing about new Marjanishvili's Free Theatre, a theatre whose motto was every direction of theatrical art. If Всеволод Meyerhold completely disregarded the actor's internal action and emotional memory, and Stanislavski's system justified every external action of the actor through the internal action, with Marjanishvili, all of this came into synthesis. The aesthetics of the free theatre itself was later called synthetic theatre, a theatre in which independent directions coexist harmoniously on stage. Tyrol can boldly be considered as Marjanishvili's pupil, Marjanishvili who effectively determined Tyrol's subsequent success on the Russian and world stage. The form of actor expression created by them was called emotional gesture. It was precisely emotional gesture that served as a kind of connecting point between Stanislavski and Meyerhold, which added emotional tension to the gesture through the actor's internal action, while the gesture made the actor's internal action more expressive. Alexander Tyrol wrote, all the emotions of the actors in our production must boil so intensely that no words are needed anymore. Emotional gesture was not the only fundamental principle of the aesthetics that was established in the Moscow Free Theatre. If the art theater created an illusion of reality and Meyerhold's theater broke every norm of academic theater and removed the footlights using the principle of the carnival, the processes taking place in the free theater can perhaps be considered as an attempt to create the illusion of the carnival. One of the most prominent literary critics of the 20th century, Mikhail Bakhtin, writes that a carnival cannot exist where there are footlights, because that is the whole essence of the carnival. It breaks all boundaries between the spectator and the actors, because in a carnival, everyone is an actor and everyone plays. Perhaps, therefore, we should not consider the aesthetics of the free theatre as a carnival, but rather an attempt to create the illusion of the carnival. Marjanishvili gave the subsequently developed acting technique the following name: the universal actor. This will be an actor who could perform operettas, dance ballet, play dramatic roles, master the art of pantomime, and, as mentioned above, know the craft of all theatrical directions. Therefore, it is no surprise that the Free Theatre opened in 1913 with Sorochin's Fair was a new beginning. Stanislavski wrote that despite the flaws in the production, the play was a standout in the Moscow theatrical landscape. Stanislavski critically evaluated the theater's next production, Offenbach's opera La Belle Elene. As Marjanishvili writes, he expected this because for a literally pedant like Stanislavski, such free treatment of the text would inevitably cause dissatisfaction. As Marjanishvili says, he staged La Belle Hélène with an associative plot, and he completely modernized the context. Subsequently, Tyrol clearly substantiates the approaches of the free theatre and chamber theatre regarding literary primary sources. They argue that if a text is staged exactly as it is written, the theatre becomes a gramophone of an author who died long ago. Therefore, it is necessary to adapt it to the existing reality. The text must remain only as material that is completely transformed on stage. Walter Benjamin begins to speak of similar approaches when explaining Brecht's concept of epic theatre. The theatre must keep pace with technology. According to Benjamin and Brecht, alienation does not only mean acting technique, but also the perception of events and the way of reading the text. Given these developments, it was entirely expected that the events that occurred in the Chamber Theatre, founded after the closure of the Free Theatre due to financial problems, would unfold as they did. Marjanishvili handed over the Chamber Theatre to Tyrov and returned to his homeland, Georgia. The productions and the principle of existence of the Chamber Theatre did not just diverge from Marjanishvili's aesthetics. Rather, they tried to follow the path he left behind. Therefore, it is not surprising that the Chamber Theatre was the first and until Stalin's death, the last theatre in the Soviet Union to stage play by Bertolt Brecht. In this case, it was the three-penny opera. The songs characteristics of Brecht, the plastic movement, and the gesture the very phenomena that corresponded from beginning to end to the theatrical principles that Marjanishvili was creating, and that is precisely why it is no surprise that the Soviet audience foresaw this specific aesthetic in the chamber theater. The phenomenon of Marjanishvili remains to this day one of the most appreciated and unrecognized figures in world theater history, and is mainly viewed as a person accompanying events rather than a leader of them, which does not coincide with the real facts. Accordingly, the phenomenon of Marjanishvili is still to be discovered by the general public. Thanks for your attention.